All right, you happily miserable accursed. We're starting today's pod with a couple of rather large, interrelated announcements. Number one, depending on which side of the aisle you lean toward, cue up the mournful funeral dirge or a celebratory fanfare, because this is Kory's last curse. But not to worry. Just like the next Prime Minister of Canada, it's only a temporary situation. As you may have heard, the 44th Ontario general election is being called on Wednesday. So Kory Teneycke is packing up his hair gel, turtlenecks, and nostril tweezers for about a month to do what Kory does best, helping Doug Ford win majority governments. Scott, Jordan, I know you must be devastated by this.
Yeah, I mean, in more ways than one. Because if Kory's not here, then he's out helping the other team. And, that's a sad day for all of us.
Exactly. Kory, you don't think we could... How much would we have to pay you to stay?
Yeah. Just make it very comfortable.
I'm torn in dozens of directions. On the one hand, I don't want Kory to lead the pod. On the other hand, I know that if Doug Ford doesn't win, then Kory will not be able to send us repeated photographs, Insta shots of himself in glamorous, expensive outfits, in glamorous, expensive places, standing in front of glamorous, expensive things. And it's all contingent on Doug Ford. So I don't know. It's almost enough to make a guy vote conservative, but not quite.
Well, hey, I make 40% of my money in Ottawa, and this last time I checked, it was Liberal there. But anyway.
I don't think you have checked lately.
That brings me to my second bit of news. Starting next Monday, Curse of Politics is going daily, Monday to Friday, for the Ontario general election, so we can properly analyze every single fucking move Kory makes as he campaign manages Premier Ford around the province, not to mention everything Marit Stiles, Bonnie Crombie, and Mike Schreiner themselves get up to. And just before your fingers type a nervy little comment into YouTube about there being no conservative in the room, Jordan, Scott, and I will be joined every day by Deb Hutton. If you don't know Deb, and you don't remember the old E.F. Hutton commercials, back in the Mike Harris majority days, when Deb sat down at the table, a hushed silence would descend. Because when Deb Hutton talks, people listen. And also, they were really fucking scared of her. She's a strategist, comms, and crisis management guru who's advised leaders, candidates, and clients in the private sector. Look for a fresh pod every day around 9 a.m. All right. Today on the show. Yeah, what?
Deb, by the way, is the OG Jenny Byrne, if you want another selling feature. She was the Queen's Park OG Jenny back in Harris days.
Yeah, a model. Yeah. All right, today on the show, Trump's first week and his political impacts on Canada. We'll look in on developments in the Liberal leadership race by way of our cursed clipping. It's from Aaron Wary at cbc.ca on the candidates reconsidering positions on capital gains and the carbon tax as the party reflects on where it wants to go. Then how are Poilievre and the CPC reacting to all these changes in our political dynamic? And finally, Mr. Pinsent takes us home with our Hey Yous. But first of all, most importantly, before any of that, hey, Jordan, did you have a birthday this week?
I did. I had a milestone birthday this week.
Get out. 40?
That's it. That's the one.
Yay.
Oh, you look it. I knew it was 40. Figured she's 40 years old.
Any full-time work in politics will age a person dramatically. So I am certainly no exception. But yes.
You look so much better than I did when I turned 40, I'm telling you. Yeah.
We have Zoom filters now. It's quite usul.
You've got the wisdom of 50 and the looks of 30. And unlike the two of us, the three of us, Scott, David, and I, whose livers are 82, maybe 83, I think you're probably healthier also. So the world's your oyster, Jordan. And,
I definitely have some more capacity to keep up with you guys in that department. So thank you very much. I look forward to celebrating in person with you guys when we
hit the road. I don't notice that you are any slacker. When it comes to red wine.
I try to do my part. We're stimulating the local economy wherever we're going. Exactly, and that starts by drinking them out of all bourbon that we can lay our hands on. So.
Well, congratulations, Jordan.
Thank you,
Jordan. I couldn't come up with words to wish you a thoughtful happy birthday, so I turned instead to @CodyYJ7532, who managed to break into YouTube to send you this thoughtful sentiment. Jordan smirking during the reading of the energy program is the reason why the NDP will never take root. When the West separates, she won't understand why, but she'll be the reason. There you go. Happy birthday from all your fans.
Love it. I am here for you, Cody.
Coursing through your veins there.
So great.
You can break up the country with just a smirk.
That's,
Taking Alberta out
if only.
Out of Canada.
We'll have them see themselves out.
All right. Speaking of people breaking up a country with just a smirk, let's move to Trump. And acknowledging we're not experts in Canada-U.S. trade, there's a lot of politics being driven by Trump in this country right now. Trump himself is Canada obsessed. He can't speak to any group without talking about how badly we've treated the U.S., how subsidized we are, and how we should be absorbed by the United States, even when he's talking to his bosses at the World Economic Forum. Polls are starting to show that this is shooting up the charts in Canada and public concern, but notably, I see no commensurate decline in public focus on affordability concerns while this other issue is shooting up the charts. But nonetheless, Trump is reshaping our politics. For God's sake, we're having an Ontario election because of him. So how and to whose benefit is he changing Canadian politics right now? Kory, why don't you lead us off on that?
Well, he's holding an economic gun to our head. That's how he's changing it. And he's talking about it a lot. Like, think of Canada-U.S. relations most of the time. Like, we're the little brother who's jumping up and down and just pleased as punch as soon as we're mentioned in any minor way by a U.S. president. And usually those mentions are reasonably favorable. We're a headline act down there right now and getting all kinds of attention that we're not used to getting, and all of it, unlike what Canadians I think are used to historically, is negative. I think a lot of it is pretty incorrect factually, and there's lots to take issue with. But I think, aside from the bluster and the hyperbole and all the things that we're used to seeing from Trump, when you scratch the surface, there's a deeper thing that's going on. If you listen to his inaugural address and some of the other things, like, I really think he's got some sort of aggressive version of the Monroe Doctrine going on in his head. He thinks he should have, a regional hegemony in a way that is more than just economic, with respect to Greenland, with respect to Panama, with respect to Canada. I think it is an isolationist view of the world in one way, but it's expansionist in terms of where he's aiming at. So I don't think this is a temporary thing. I think we're going to be living this with some version of this for the breadth and depth of his presidency. I don't think it's going away. I think there's an underlying strategy or view of the world that he wants to see executed, and he sees economic levers and tariffs as the primary way to get us there. So get ready, guys. This is going to be going on for a while.
Right. Jordan, do you think it's really changed the federal ballot question?
I do. Yeah. I think that we were very much likely to be headed into an election where the only ballot question was the chance for voters to render a verdict on Trudeau. And that obviously is no longer now the case, although, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, I think that the Conservatives are certainly going to try to resurrect that dynamic. But we are now in a place where, and I've talked about this before, but I think what we're going to see is a coming together of the concerns about Trump and tariffs and trade and affordability concerns. Because once those tariffs are a real thing, all of a sudden that's really going to upend our economy. And so you're going to see massive layoffs. You're going to see a withdrawal of business investment. You're going to see unemployment going up pretty dramatically. And so all of that is just going to become like this ball of economic anxiety in Canada. And I think that really who is going to be best to manage and deal with that, both in terms of dealing with Trump, but also in terms of dealing with the domestic fallout of it, is going to be the question. And so I think that presents, challenges and opportunities for all the parties in different ways. And I'll leave the Conservatives aside because we're going to talk about them a little bit more. But I think for Liberals and New Democrats, there is an opening here, because the question, I think, for a lot of voters will be, who do you sort of trust to have your back when these large economic forces that are out of our control come visiting, when we're in a crisis situation that could rival COVID? Who is going to be there to sort of bolster the structures and the supports and the programs and the things that people depend on to get through the month if their job were to suddenly evaporate? If food prices were forget 10% inflation on food prices, like that's going to look cute when if we start to have a tit for tat trade war with the United States. So I do think that there's an opportunity there for the NDP, for Liberals to some degree, to go out and shift the question into some more favorable grounds. But and others have said this, but Trump has really scrambled our politics because he's also so deeply chaotic and unpredictable. And so you're right, I think, that the tariffs, yes, they're a measure to raise revenue, but they're also a measure of chaos, and they're a measure to get attention. Trump has discovered that if he talks about tariffs, he talks about applying large tariffs on allies.
Yeah, look at Colombia yesterday.
That's right. Exactly. This is just a way to detonate basically global affairs and to keep people coming back to him and centering him in that discussion. And I think the test now, and what's interesting for political leaders in Canada, is like you really have two paths, right? Do you go sort of as Danielle Smith has done, somewhat on bended knee, try to placate, try to sort of get yourself in there on his terms in a more flattering way and make an appeal that perhaps is divisive within Canada, but just try to get out with your own skin intact? Or do you take a more confrontational approach, which is actually, I think, what we're seeing from Ford, where you stand up and you say, none of this is going to happen, and we will fight you every step of the way. And, to circle back to where I started, and I think that some of what we're going to see over the next few weeks is the awkwardness of Poilievre needing to choose a lane there in a way that he hasn't yet had to. But all of this is not also, it's not necessarily excellent news for the Liberals. I don't think that they are imminently about to choose somebody who has a ton of experience dealing with Trump as their leader. So it is a question whether the pitch that Carney is making will resonate with voters who are about to be victimized, I think, in a lot of ways by the very markets that he talks about understanding and knowing how to work with. And for the NDP, the challenge is that this isn't really a ballot question on its face that's super favorable for them. They often will struggle and get a bit squeezed out of this discussion. So they have to find their own footing that allows themselves to be a bit wrapped in the flag and to talk about sort of taking care of Canadians through the tumult that's really about to descend on us.
You'll get nothing and like it. A talent of mine is that I can quote damn near 100% of the character dialogue from the movie Caddyshack. It's a dubious skill. That particular line is from Judge Smales, played by the great Ted Knight, to his nephew Spaulding, who can't decide whether to get a cheeseburger or a hot dog. But I think you can reasonably apply it to the battle for consumer choice and genuine competition in high-speed internet service. You'll recall that a federal cabinet order suggested our presenting sponsor, TELUS, be barred from accessing the fiber networks required to offer those services to new customers in Ontario and Quebec. The upshot? Consumers in those markets could lose out on lower prices, 19% lower in Ontario compared to a year ago, and also miss out on innovative service bundles. But what they're not doing is sitting quietly and liking it. I'll get to that part in a second. The two corporate giants in the region, the Bell and Rogers duopoly, let's call it Brogers, have been getting their say and for the moment their way. Their message has been amplified through the megaphone of a proxy organization, the CNOC, Competitive Network Operators of Canada, who've put forward arguments that closely mirror Brogers' own. A concerning alignment with the very entities they were meant to challenge. So whose interests are being served here? Consumers or corporations? I mentioned people are not sitting quietly and accepting all of this. There are over 200,000 signatures on a petition supporting TELUS's entry into Ontario and Quebec. These are 200,000 voices representing families and businesses who clearly don't like what they've been handed for years now, limited options, and high prices. 200,000 voices demanding change in the form of true competition. You can add yours at demandmoreinternetchoice.ca. The question here isn't whether competition is good for consumers. It always is. The real question comes down to this. Are we going to listen to those voices or continue to protect the status quo? Scott, there's a strand about positioning in there that I want to come back to, but I first want to come back to you on the ballot question. So I had Trevor Toome on the Herle Burley this weekend, and he said that the models don't say a COVID-style crisis for Canada. The models say a normal-sized recession is what these tariffs result in. Unfortunately, a permanent normal-sized recession, but a normal-sized recession. So if that's the case, if that's what happens, is that going to be seen, again, coming back to the federal ballot question, is that going to be seen as Trump's fault, and how does Canada stand up and deal with Trump? Or is that just another log on the burning Liberal fire of shitty economic performance? Because I do want to come back to the fact that as this issue shoots up in the polls as a issue of concern to Canadians, there's no drop in the number of Canadians concerned about affordability, no drop in the number of Canadians concerned about healthcare. Like, these issues are still there.
Yeah. I don't think there's any question, just to go to your most kind of top level question, that Trump will be seen as the architect of whatever badness comes. Now, that doesn't mean that pain won't be spread on others, and the voters might not take it out on the incumbent government for being inadequate or not doing enough or whatever have you. But I think Trump will be actually pointed at. There's just so much Trump that I think there's almost no mistaking that people will say he's the fault of it. But I think Trump, I think he presents unique challenges to every political party and leader. Like, I think for the government, it's incredibly challenging. They're already far behind in terms of popularity. Economic distress is a thing that helps to fuel the change rocket that is taking them out of government. And they are dealt with the uncomfortable deal of having to manage that combination of how much do you stand up, how much do you engage, how much do you mitigate, how much do you scream at them. And Trump drags everybody's politics down, right? Like, everybody, Trump is so flagrant, so flippant, so vulgar that there's a large constituency, and I'm sure it's a growing constituency and will grow even larger, for people to sort of say, let's do the Denmark. Let's get be like the Danish prime minister and just have one of our leaders stand up and say, why don't you literally fuck yourself, Donald Trump? And there'll be loud cheers for that. I think for the NDP, there's a big loss, a big challenge that, they've seen no bounce out of a historic failure on the part of the Liberals to rally any kind of popular support. And they're not the beneficiaries of it. And I think Trump actually further pushes them and squeezes them out of the picture and runs real risk. And I think for Poilievre, although it feels to me like it's still a changed election, all those issues are stuck there, I do think there's an underlying challenge for him. And it isn't just about the specifics that he proposes with respect to tariff relief, and I know we'll come back to that later, or tariff management. But he, I think, in particular, has a voter coalition issue, and conservatives don't like to talk about it. But let's be honest, there is a Venn diagram that overlaps with his voter cohort more than anyone else, and it's not just about Trump. It's deeper than that, and there are a lot of people who, contrary to their own economic and personal interest, voted for Trump in the United States because they feel that the system for 3 decades has let them down and has screwed them. And many of those people are exactly right. The system and the structures have let them down and has screwed them. And there's a bunch of people in Canada who have felt that way. We see it manifest in political dialogue all the time. And a bunch of those people have been supporting Poilievre because, A, as a mainstream politician, he's been willing to give more voice to that than almost any leader in modern memory. B, he's the opposition leader against the incumbent institutionalist Liberals. And C, he sometimes does pick up policies and rhetoric from Trump and manner, not like anti-immigration, but just the rhetoric and the manner and the tone. And so I think that he's got to be careful because he has this balance of he wants to maintain the support of all those who want to burn the barn down, but he knows he has to talk about how to save the barn. And that's awkward. I think it's manageable because the locomotive behind change is so steamed up, but I think it's uniquely challenging for him to figure out how to do that. Because the second that he says Trump should go fuck himself, some of those voters go, wait a second, I like that guy because he's the guy that's bringing the castle down, and I want the castle down. He's the guy that's burning the barn down. I want the barn burned down. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch how he navigates it. And by the way, I agree with what he's done so far, which is, kind of stay on the sidelines as much as possible. Like, let people talk about, which liberal leader got which endorsement this week and what Trump says. Like, why get in the middle of it politically? Why would you get in the middle of it, insert yourself into the debate when all of the options are kind of, less than 47%, which is what you're floating at?
Yeah. Kory, what do you think Canadians are looking for out of their leaders more right now? A sort of a bellicose nationalism, or a sort of a calm managerial approach to this?
Probably something in between. I talk about this more in my Hey You, but if you're looking at the polling, I think one of the reasons why you're seeing some movement, provincially right now is around this issue, and people want to see a more robust defense of Canada in some parts of the country. I'd say most parts of the country. So I think there's some votes there. Just around, what moves in this. Like, I think it depends which demographic group you're looking at. Most of the growth that Ford's seen is middle-aged women. And guess who they don't like? Donald Trump.
Right.
That's also the group where Poilievre is doing the most poorly in terms of demographic groups. I actually think he has room to grow as he shifts to responding to Trump, and I agree with Scott. It's not smart to dive into that until you're actually in office and actually have your hands on the levers. I think he's playing that exactly right, but I think there's a chance that it might, in a minor way, alter his electoral coalition as he responds to this, but I don't think it's going to change the top line numbers a lot for the reason that you talked about, David, which is cost of living and the economy and all of that are still right up there in terms of issues. And he has such a commanding lead on those issues that, a greater focus on the economy as a result of tariffs, all of that, it pushes the issue set more into favorable territory for him. Overall, which is economic management. Like, look, I listened to your podcast actually on the way in this morning with Trevor Toom, and didn't agree with everything he had to say, but like his diagnosis on what's been happening in the Canadian economy in the last decade is pretty jarring. Like, nobody feels like they're better off than they were 10 years ago, because nobody is better off than they were 10 years ago is the sad truth. And they're a lot less well off than they would be if they were living in the United States or just about anywhere else on earth. So, in terms of the developed world. So, I think this pushes the narrative and the debate and the lens of voters more towards the economy. I think that's overall good for Poilievre. I hear what you're saying, Scott, in terms of, some of those conservative voters are anti-establishment and probably like Trump quite a bit more than the median. But it also opens up avenues for him with some voters who aren't with him right now, who are, with Ford or other conservatives elsewhere in the country. And I think he has votes that he could pick up there. So, I don't see anything that's particularly risky around this situation for him as it's developed so far. Maybe that'll change, but I'm not seeing it in any of the numbers so far.
Scott, how would you be positioning Carney on this matter? As the technocrat who's going to fucking get in there and press all the right buttons and pull all the right levers and get this thing figured out? Or as the Captain Canada champion?
I'd lean a lot harder to Captain Canada than we've seen so far. And I mean, if you look at Carney's campaign to date, it's really been very light on public interventions, right? You know, he did his launch and then we've had a week of endorsements. So, and I think that seems very deliberate. Like they're sort of seem to be rolling out in phases. I think we're going to hear him. He promises to do some policy and positioning this week. So I think we'll hear him chart some of this territory. But my gut is that there is a lot of upside in public opinion within Canada right now, particularly in the Liberal NDP voter coalition, potential coalition world, trying to move that Liberal vote ceiling from whatever it's at now, 37, 38. I don't know, you tell me, David, you're the pollster, but to get it back up to 55 or just anything better than 37, I think there's a lot of room for someone who's going to be a little more bellicose, who's willing to say, you know what, and you can add some intelligence to that. It doesn't have to just be go fuck yourself, Donald Trump. In fact, it shouldn't just be that. But it should. If I was advising Carney, I would tell him more energy because he still looks like as flat as a plate of soup. And second, I would add a little bit more Captain Canada to it, or I would be certain to put a good dose of that in there and say, listen, we're going to stand up for ourselves and we are not without tools. And if you want to do this, we're going to make this hard on you. And I learned when I was in grade school how to deal with a bully, and we're not going to fuck around. And I would add a dose of that. And because I think if the alternative is to say, at the Bank of England, I navigated carefully how to use monetary policy with coordinating with those who were setting fiscal policy, and together we managed to avert like that. No, that's not the play, man, right? You got to rescue a dying political creature here. Okay. So a little energy, a little emotion, and a little appeal to what a large chunk of people want to hear, which is piss on you, Donald Trump. I would go as close to that line as I could. I'd go over that line. I'd go way over that line. I'd bear way over it.
He doesn't the Liberal Party doesn't need to eat better. They need a heart transplant. It's not like reduced cholesterol.
Yeah.
Too late for the kale to save them.
It's major organ replacement territory.
So I want to talk some more about this trade war that's apparently hurtling toward us, specifically as it concerns Canadian forest products. Here are a couple of facts. First, the United States is not self-sufficient when it comes to softwood lumber. It doesn't produce nearly enough to satisfy the appetite of its consumer economy. Second, Canadian softwood is superior. That's just a fact. Because of our climate, Canadian lumber grows more slowly, so it's more stable than the stuff that comes out of pine forests in the American South. It's easier to handle, to cut, and to nail, and it's a lot more popular with builders. Which is why up to 30% of the softwood lumber Americans consume each year comes from Canada. 28 million cubic meters in 2023. Our sponsor, CN, moved a lot of that. Look, American protectionism is nothing new to Canada's forest industry. Various U.S. administrations, pushed by American producers, have deployed tariffs to limit Canadian competition. It's been hashed out at trade tribunals. It was a major reason for the existence of our free trade agreements with the United States. Canada has even agreed to impose voluntary caps on exports. My point is, negotiation is the way to deal with trade issues. Negotiation and respecting signed agreements. As Harold Macmillan said, jaw is better than war. CN has been moving forestry products, mostly lumber, pulp, and paper, between our two countries for more than a century. The railway believes in smooth, unhindered free trade. Tariffs and the inevitable retaliatory tariffs are, as somebody on this pod said last week, like chemotherapy. You get really sick before you get better. Hundreds of thousands of jobs on both sides of the border are at risk. They don't have to be.
But I think, Scott hits the nail on the head. There's a real danger for Carney in his campaign because a lot of the response where he's positioning himself in terms of why he would be the best to take on Trump is reinforcing all of the worst stuff about the Liberals defending institutions that are failing people. It's all kind of elite consensus economic fucking bullshit that people are really tired of. And in a moment where economic populism is the order of the day, I think he really risks coming out not only flat and boring, but also just on the wrong side of these questions. And I noted with some interest over the weekend
three words I would advise him to not say. Internal trade barriers. Fuck, come on.
Guess what, guys? I hate to break it to you. I'm not an economist, but I'm reliably informed that we could eliminate every fucking internal trade barrier in the country, and it wouldn't make a shit bit of difference if we're in a tit-for-tat tariff war with the United States. Like, this is not mobilizing people. And the thing I think that for Carney is sort of particularly dangerous is because all of that plays into his weakest possible narrative about who he is as a politician and why he's there. Like, the economic sharks are kind of already circling. You're seeing banks come out and say, like, oh, this would be a great moment for a little bit of deregulation and some cross-the-board corporate tax cuts to spur investment, And so there's going to be, as the Liberal Party looks to pull themselves further to the center on policy, there's going to be all sorts of, like, politically shitty ideas that are going to seem very appealing. And I think that he is ripe to attract those to him, and it's not a good narrative for them.
Don't scoop the clipping. But as much as you enjoy pointing out all the problems facing Mark Carney, I want to come back and put you on the spot about something that you said, which is, Jesus, come on. Surely this is brutal for fucking sing. I mean, when there's an international thing and the issue is how are we going to deal with it, people start to think about who's going to be the prime minister a lot more than what's the shape of the House of Commons going to be. And so there is no question about Canada-U.S. relations that I can see that Jagmeet Singh is the answer to. And I don't know how Ed Broadbent could not fight his way into the 88 campaign debate, right? And I don't see how Jagmeet Singh's going to become relevant in this discussion.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about the structural challenge for the NDP in this dynamic. That Canada-US fight, anything related to kind of trade, externally focused, is really, really difficult for them to break in on, like, frankly, regardless of leader, as the Ed example, I think, really demonstrates. I think that for the NDP, their path lies in a different place. It's when people are concerned about the impacts here in Canada, who's going to be on your side, who's going to make sure that you have what you need to get through the month, who's going to fight for you. That has to be the pool that they're kind of playing in, because I think there's an opportunity there, because Poilievre has been clear that he is going to go after some of the programs and some of the supports that would be helpful for Canadians here. They can wedge hard on that. If the Liberals, they look to be doing, do choose Carney, as we're going to talk more about, there is some space opening up on the left for those things. They've got to fight on that terrain. They have to fight, I think, a lot closer to home. And that will become easier for them to do in the RIT period. Right now is the hardest time because they are disadvantaged in terms of their ability to spend and also to get into that earned media cycle for whatever it's worth right now. Even that is harder to break into.
I hate that argument, though. Race. That's the same argument the Liberals were using about not advertising. It's like, listen, I can't get a date to the prom, but once the dance starts, everyone's going to want me. It doesn't work that way.
I'm not saying it's good that they're not advertising. They should be advertising. But in a world in which that their fundraising does not allow that to happen, it is true that the table gets set a little bit differently during the RIT period.
Okay, let's go to our clipping of the week, which comes to us from cbc.ca and the very, very strong pen of Aaron Wary. Aaron, I want to say how much I enjoy reading your stuff on a week-in, week-out basis.
It's sad that you'll be fired and without a job in 4 months.
I didn't want to say that, but, you
know. I think he knows it.
Maybe, yeah.
Aaron's a fine guy. I enjoy reading his stuff a little less than you guys do, probably, but I agree he's a good guy.
All right, here's a relatively extended segment of this article. The Liberal Party has long operated on the left side of the political spectrum, but it has also long displayed a willingness and an ability to shift with the prevailing political winds. That's how a party gets from Mackenzie King, famously cautious, to Lester Pearson, famously active, to Jean Chrétien, famously balanced the federal budget, to Justin Trudeau, famously didn't. In word and deed, Trudeau moved the Liberal Party further to the left than it had been under his immediate predecessors. To some extent, that might have been dictated by the preeminent concerns of the moment. But long before Trudeau was compelled to resign, it was possible to see how the party might change tack again, even if only slightly, in his wake. Trudeau's Liberals were widely viewed as being primarily focused on things like inequality, wealth redistribution, social programs, climate change, and reconciliation. And so it would be unsurprising if the race to choose Trudeau's successor saw some push to focus on things that he was accused of not paying enough attention to, like economic growth and fiscal discipline. In addition to the fiscal cost of scrapping the capital gains changes, there should be some caution politically. This is a quote now from Tyler Meredith, talking about scrapping the capital gains. There should be some caution politically, because the question will be, do you put something else in the window that speaks to progressives? Tyler Meredith, a former senior policy advisor, warned on the Race to Replace podcast this week. The Liberal Party's biggest concern right now might be closing the gap with the Conservatives, but it also owes a fair bit of its success in the last 3 elections to progressive policies and winning progressive votes on issues like climate change and reconciliation. So, Scott, one of the principles of the comeback that I always believe in from a situation like this, where you are, where the Liberals are, is you need a new leader. The other leader needs to be rendered unacceptable. And you need a signature policy issue to allow the NDP vote to rally around you to stop Poilievre. They want to do that, but they need something to make them feel good. In 2014, it was the pension plan, the Ontario Retirement Pension Plan. It seemed like a strong progressive flag to have planted. In 2004, when we did this, it was healthcare, right? So, what do you think of the dilemma for the Liberals that Wary lines out? Tacking back to the center, becoming seen as more focused on economics in order to pull back votes from the Conservatives, but are there votes that Trudeau had that are really NDP votes?
Some. I think 2 things. I think there are ways to address that challenge, but that challenge and this entire kind of game of electoral bingo that we just described exists in a universe removed from the current context of Trump and the policy imperatives that Trump and responding to Trump is going to impose on us. So, and I worry, I hear what Tyler is saying, but I'm not certain the way you put a fire out in the kitchen is by pouring water on your mattress, right? Like, I just think we've got to. And that analogy, don't give me that face, Jordan. That was fucking smart, funny stuff. I mean, you just take your rain cloud
You started
reaction.
and she got her hopes up, and then it was what it was.
Like,
it ended up
I
with
didn't
a
know where we were
mattress,
going with
a
that,
stained,
but it landed on the
kind of a-
mattress, Scott.
kind of
So
stained, a wet mattress.
color
What
me
the hell is he talking
unsurprised.
about? All right. I think I was going to bring this up in the earlier segment, actually, when Jordan was talking about the need for a policy response to Trump that watches people's backs. But I wanted to hold it for now because I think that actually there's an opportunity for Carney to zag a bit here. And I hope that one of the things he'll talk about this week is that he will be the guy who will be inventive and creative and steal that ground and say, listen, if we can't deal with this menace, if it's going to take us 2 years to deal with this menace and it's going to cost us GDP, and it's going to threaten jobs, right? I will be there as someone who understands the economy, as someone who will manage the economy better, i.e. than Justin Trudeau, and do what Poilievre will not and cannot, and that is make certain that we support our workers and our industry. And yes, that includes the energy industry. I think that he's well positioned to bring that forward. And if he puts an emphasis on workers, it's one of the ways in which he can satisfy this test that you're talking about as well, David. But I think there's other things. He could talk about expanding dental care, which I think I'm alone among the programmatic efforts of Trudeau to sort of, expand the social safety net. I think it's probably the most popular and most reasonable in the eyes of middle-class Canadians. I also think, though, Carney needs to front all of that with an announcement of a middle-class tax cut. I think that he gives people the promise that he will bring a different kind of focus economically to the party and to the government, to the agenda, with a broad tax cut promise, and then match that with, I will be more inventive. That's the beginning of what I will do. That's the all of what you will get from Poilievre. I will also respond to Trump, not just by calling him a prick and battling him on tariffs, but also by making certain that we protect workers in industry and small business. And I think that's where you can steal the thunder on the NDP, and I think you can wedge Poilievre as well. So I'll be looking to see as she rolls stuff out this week, whether that kind of thing, that blend, that balance is there.
Kory, what do you think? Think the Liberals can move enough to the center to start to compete with the Conservatives without losing votes on the left that they currently are holding?
I think they can, because I think that the median of where the Canadian public is on some of these things has shifted. I would question Carney's ability to do it. Like, I think he has some credentials and some cred around the economy and fiscal matters, perhaps. But I don't think that's where most of the shift has happened. I think most of the shift, certainly on deficit spending, all of that, Trudeau went way left. But I think he went way, way more left on cultural issues. I think he went way more left on the, never-ending series of apologies for Canada being Canada and its history and all of that stuff, all the DEI stuff, all of that ethos of sort of wokeness, I think has been jarring for a lot of Canadians who used to vote for them. And they don't see the party as being in the mainstream. They see it as being, maybe at the center of the fairway at York University, but not anywhere else, not in Main Street, you name the community, right? So, and Carney, I think, is as bad as Trudeau is on that stuff. I think he's Mr. DEI. I think he's Mr. Woke. I think he's all of that stuff, and loves to talk about it. So, he may be tacking on to the right and to more to the center on the economy, but I think he's got to jettison some of that other stuff, because I think some of that other stuff is some of the burrs that are in the saddle that are really aggravating for a lot of people who used to vote for them. And let's just be clear, most of the Conservative growth has come at the expense of the Liberals. And look at how Poilievre talks about those issues, and look at how the Liberals talk about those issues. And you can't tell me that isn't part of it.
God, I am going to miss Kory and the chutzpah. I am. Because I think we should just, I know we rarely let
You don't
facts
consider
intrude
Mark
here.
Carney the global poster child for diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Oh, man. Think of England.
I have
gender-neutral washroom.
But I want to
every
put on the record here that who was the fucking federal politician this week who brought pronouns and genders into the headline? And guys, I got to tell you, it wasn't a Liberal. It wasn't a New Democrat. It was Pierre Poilievre. So, and that's a trend that holds through recent provincial races that we've seen from Scott Moe to Blaine Higgs.
Brought them in a way into the headlines.
This is a fight that is absolutely being leveraged to the benefit of Conservatives and Conservatives only. So my fellow progressives listening, do not fucking bite on this shit.
Jordan,
Yes.
Jordan, pick up. Where do you think the Liberals may be vulnerable if they try to go after current Conservative votes?
So beautifully, I think almost everywhere, which is great for the NDP because it provides a very helpful opening. I think to pick up specifically on what Scott was saying, because he's quite right about a lot of the dynamics he described, particularly around almost like the permission structure that the Liberals rely on for New Democrats to vote Liberal in a campaign. And he's right about that. But the problem is that actually cuts both ways. And when you look at the dynamics within the progressive primary that we traditionally have in Canada, what is the one thing that Liberals always can offer? And in fact, that is their core offer that differs from New Democrats. Well, that's power. And the problem is, in this campaign, that is the one thing that they cannot credibly offer. So the challenge is that circumstance, and we saw it federally in 2011, we saw it provincially in 2018, that permission structure can then flip the other way, where you get NDP Liberal switchers who then have a permission structure to do what they actually want to do, which is vote New Democrat. Because you've got Liberals now who are out there, they are tacking more to the center.
You're talking about 2018 for provincial.
Yes, that's right. 2018 provincially, yeah. And 2011 federally. That's like that dynamic was very much at play there. And I think that the problem is that right now, for the Liberals federally, you've got both of your main leadership candidates like it's not the normal thing where we flash left, we govern right. Okay. So now it's like we're flashing right, and that's well ahead of the election. Well, people are sort of looking at their progressive options. People who are not interested in voting Poilievre, they're weighing that. Now, the question is, are they going to be bought off by sort of a small token, worker-centric industrial policy from a guy who's a former fucking hedge fund manager? I don't think so. I don't think that's what's going to happen. And I'm going to tell you also that I think that what Freeland did this week, where she joined Carney in throwing overboard the capital gains tax changes, which, I'm old enough to remember the spring, the budget, when this was what was going to save civilization from deep inequality. And this was a matter of fundamental economic and generational justice. Well, look, the reasons that the Liberals put that in the budget, those reasons still exist in terms of motivating voters. It was a symbol. It was a symbol about on whose side you could find that government and that party. It was a symbol about generationally who they appeal to. It was a symbol for all of those things. And they are busy hucking those off the back of the truck. And you better believe that the NDP is going to be going and scooping those up. They are creating an opening space on the left in a moment when the permission structure for those switch voters to vote for them is actually at its weakest. So I think that the equation does not work the way that it would typically work for the Liberals in this campaign. And I think regardless of who wins, be it Freeland or Carney, there is going to be opportunity there for the NDP to go in and solidify some of that.
So you're counting on an unsuccessful Liberal leadership race because you're assuming that there's no significant spread between the two parties going into the writ.
Yeah, I think that is, and I think that actually it's very interesting because what we've seen, barring one poll, we've seen the numbers be fairly stagnant for the Liberals since Trudeau's resignation. There has not been a massive boost that maybe people thought were there. And actually, I was really interested to see, Abacus had some numbers out last week. I think they did a poll for The Line, and there was an interesting little tidbit in there on most trusted to handle the economy. Like, you guys, it's a 2-point spread between the NDP and the Liberals. Like that, there are some weak, soft points in there.
But when you're only at 4%,
and that all of that has to do with just people being done with the Liberals as a party.
Yeah. Well, that may be true. Look. Yeah, go ahead, Kory.
Sorry, look, I'll buy a lot of that, Jordan, up to a point, but I think like the difference that is, really at the core of what's been preventing the growth of the NDP and the environment you're talking about. And like I'll concede to you, like the logic flow of that, is sturdy. But when you look at other examples where the NDP has been able to capitalize on a weak Liberal Party, they've had a popular leader. And what's the line? I knew Jack Leighton, and sir, you know Jack Leighton.
Yeah.
Like the
yeah, but Kory,
the challenge.
May I on that?
Okay,
because Jack Leighton was also not Jack Leighton until the fourth cycle he did, and he never broke 18% in the popular vote until he did. So I also think that we have to be aware that there can be shifts that occur.
We know a lot about where he stands right now in popularity, and it ain't good in terms of Jagmeet. It is not good, and I think that's part of the challenge. Like I agree with you that there is an opportunity and an avenue for the NDP to see some growth, but I think when we've seen that happen in the past, they've had a leader with some game, and as much as one can try to put air in Jagmeet's tires. Like, if he has game, he's keeping it hidden. He's hiding it. I'm going to be very
surprised. I'm going to be very surprised if he takes off in rural Quebec.
Yeah. Well, the dynamic doesn't need to be the same. But one thing I will say, I agree with Kory on a point, and in a different way, which is that the big challenge for the NDP remains similar to what it was this summer, right? So, why did they get out of the confidence and supply agreement? Well, there's lots of reasons in the window, but I think that one of the core reasons, of course, was that it was starting to erode what had been a real strength for the NDP, which was Jagmeet's net favorables compared to everybody else. Now, the challenge that the NDP has is that those favorables have not rebounded. So they have to find a way. They need to find a way to make a break. They still haven't yet cracked that nut. And that is the challenge that they have before them in order to be on better footing as they go into the writ period. So I agree with Kory that there is a like leadership challenge there. But what I don't agree with, I don't think it's irredeemable by any stretch. I think that the fundamentals remain pretty good, and that there is opportunity there if they're able to grab it.
Well, it's the same challenge that I think all the leaders will have to one degree or another is leadership numbers are comparative exercise. And those comparisons were against Justin Trudeau, aka the most hated guy in Canadian politics, in modern polling. And,
but also
and he is gone. And so now,
right?
Right. But I think that, when you're looking at those choices, say you're not a conservative voter, you're never going to vote conservative, and you're trying to decide which two of these progressive parties you're going to vote for, there is a comparison that goes on. And you can't tell me that Singh's numbers were better when Trudeau was there in terms of that comparison than he will be with Trudeau not there. Like, I think
Singh's numbers were best when nobody cared about him.
Right.
Singh's numbers were best when nobody cared about him. And then he got into the confidence and supply agreement, and then conservatives decided they didn't like him. Yeah. And then he broke the supply and confidence agreement, and then liberals decided they didn't like him.
Poured money into negative advertising against him. Like, we also can't forget that, right? Like, this is the flip side to sort of, to risking something, you become a target. And so I also think that, of course, we can't underestimate that dynamic. Those numbers did not magically drop, right?
Well, that's true.
TikTok has been a major champion of Canadian creators, musicians, and small businesses who are using the platform to reach a global community of over 1 billion users. TikTok Canada has a team of hundreds of local employees dedicated to supporting the success of Canadian creators and businesses on its platform. The federal government, however, has ordered TikTok to shut down its Canadian offices. While the TikTok app will remain available in Canada, TikTok's hundreds of Canadian employees will lose their jobs, eliminating important roles and the support that's provided for the over 14 million Canadians who use TikTok. TikTok Canada believes it's important to have employees in Canada, supporting Canadian creators and advertisers, paying Canadian taxes, and operating under Canadian law. Facts matter. Simply put, shutting down TikTok Canada eliminates jobs and stymies investments in Canada. Stay tuned over the next month to hear more about the work that TikTok Canada's employees do to support the success and safety of Canadians on TikTok.
I think this discussion and dynamic, by the way, highlights why Freeland has had absolutely zero oxygen this week. Because I think and you hear some, and Tyler was among them. He and I had an exchange this week about this. There are some liberals who were like, how come? What's the how come carny? Like, how come there's all these major endorsements? How come from people that you might think of as more center left than center right within the Liberal caucus and cabinet? And I think it's because people are doing this calculation in their minds. And they're saying, all right, if the party now is to have, as with all the challenges, Liberal Party, with all the challenges it faces, if it's to have any opportunity of nudging out from under this rock, and with Trudeau's name no longer on the ballot, and with Singh there, what's for the NDP looking like a blockage in terms of voters migrating there? Who gives us the best chance to possibly be, not guaranteed by any stretch, but just gives us a chance to maybe pick up 5 to 10, 12%. And it's not Freeland, because if you're like, well, Freeland and Jugmeat, you kind of go, well, I don't even know how that plays out. And I think she's having a really hard time among progressives in her own party, convincing people that there's any hope of renewal, oxygen, or daylight there.
Well, Seamus O'Regan, in a really good video, laid out exactly why people aren't supporting Chrystia Freeland, who you might have thought should be supporting Chrystia Freeland, because I would put Seamus in that category, for that matter, right?
Yeah.
And Seamus said, Canadians are demanding change.
Yes.
New people, new ideas. We can either listen to that or not.
That was it. Well, I saw that Seamus video too,
I hear
and
that
he
Mark
absolutely
Carney
nailed
is the candidate of the establishment. Chrystia Freeland told me that.
I assumed all of these Trudeau cabinet ministers, who are sort of left to center We're going with Carney because he showed them his hidden agenda of woke DEI, blah, blah, blah.
That's right.
Does that know what it is?
Yeah,
Does that know what
absolutely.
It is?
The genderless future that he will force down everyone's throat.
I've been waiting decades to use the hidden agenda on you fuckers because you always use it on us. So there you go. Mark Carney,
I roll that
hidden
out, by the
DEI
way.
agenda.
All right. Here's my last topic for today. The Conservatives seem to have focused on Carney as their target among the leadership candidates. They'll throw something at Freeland once in a while, but they're on Carney like white on rice. Endless attacks on social, sending Melissa Lantsman to his events, putting out a Sunday letter, albeit one dated 2024, calling on him not to include any Trudeau ministers in his cabinet. Let me say right now, I don't think they're panicking because they're seeing something internally that's really shaking them up, because I don't believe anything is happening that would show up in the polling like that. Count me as one of the people that remains deeply skeptical that there's been big movement in this race. I think it's more likely that there's been some movement among underliers, maybe more undecided, maybe more openness to the Liberal Party than there was before. But if people think the gap has closed significantly, I don't believe that. So I don't think they're panicking, but they do seem more jumpy and unsettled on their message than they've seemed for some time. Jordan, what are you seeing in the Conservative reaction to what's going on with the Liberals?
Yeah, I think unsettled is definitely the right word for it. I mean, look, they're the dog that caught the car, right? You have the carbon tax has been thrown overboard by all the major candidates. Trudeau is gone. All of the things that they built their campaign around are no longer on the table. And I think that what we're seeing is a process where they're struggling to reorient. I thought the letter to Carney this weekend was a really a bit of a weird move. Poilievre's desire to insert himself personally into the leadership race, I think, is pretty misplaced. The Liberals, as we've just discussed at length, are doing a really excellent job of shearing themselves apart in ways that are largely favorable to their opponents. I don't know why you would get in the way of it. So it's been interesting to see, because I think that there's an uncertainty that we're seeing in their tactics that we haven't seen. Well, I mean, the last time I think we saw some of those missteps was in early December around the Trump pieces. But he's got some interesting squares to circle. So that's reorienting the campaign around the changes that are happening in the Liberal leadership is one. Figuring out a path on Trump is another, because he does have to walk between sort of not appearing to agree with or placate or any of those things, but also, finding a way to sort of leverage whatever perceived.
He did a pretty reasonable interview on that this weekend, didn't he?
Yeah, I thought that it certainly was more convincing than what we had seen in December. So there's obviously evolution of their thinking happening on it, but they seem unnerved a little bit. I agree with you. I don't think that they're massively worried about Carney or anything like that. There isn't a lot of movement happening, but they do need to figure out a way to reorient their campaign, and they have not yet comfortably landed on that. On the other hand, I think from a campaign tactics perspective, sending Lantsman out to the events, that stuff is all that's just good craft, right? I think that that's all very fair game and something you would really expect to see. But having the leader's voice involved in the Liberal leadership race is a bit of a weird choice for me.
Kory, I remember back when Brown was dumped and Ford replaced him in 2018. And we had to suddenly figure out, without a lot of prep, how to run against Doug Ford. And it took us a while, if we ever figured out what the right attack lines were on him. I think it's fair to say we never figured it out. So, but we had to change everything up and figure out how to critique somebody completely different. Now, Ford was a difficult person to critique, but what do you think's going on inside the Conservative HQ right now as they try to sort out what's the right way to nail Carney to the wall?
I think you're seeing them do what I think is the most sensible play, which is tie him to unpopular positions and things that are part of the Trudeau administration. and not let him become an agent of change, right? Like you don't, they set up a campaign around Trudeau and carbon tax and affordability. I think affordability is still there. And the Liberals are, all the leadership camps are trying to tack away from the carbon tax. Well, what's the most sensible thing to do? You try to not let them fully do that, right? You want to have it be, well, okay, they woke up this morning and they were all Anglicans yesterday, and today they're Catholics. I don't know. It just seems like a bit of a conversion in a very short period of time.
That's a natural evolution, though, isn't it? I mean,
well, I don't know. Maybe we need something a little bit more. I don't know.
Become a Presbyterian and find God for real.
Kory backing slowly out of this analogy.
How did I get into religion? I don't even fucking know. Do I sound like I'm fucking religious? No, I fucking don't.
Catholics like to pour.
Well, don't challenge my devout Catholicism.
I would never do that, David.
Thank you.
But look, they're going to try to tie him to positions that he has been on the record agreeing with Trudeau, and I think that's the most obvious thing to do. I think there are differences in terms of personality, and I think that's always the more tricky part of it. And here's what makes it a little bit more tricky with Carney versus Freeland is we don't really know what his public political persona is going to look like. Because we're just starting to see it present itself now, and it's kind of like watching Bambi learn to walk. Like it's a little shaky legged and it's a little over here or over there. But it hasn't really evened out into something where you can say, okay, this is how you go after this guy. Here's the buttons you can press. Here's where he's offside with voters. Because like Mark Carney has been an idea. He's been a concept more than he's been an actual person with a public profile and, in the political realm that is understood by voters. So, you could go and do a focus group a day on this guy, and I don't think you're going to get a lot of feedback on it because, there's not enough time in the arena to really evaluate it and know, where the soft spots are. By the way, you missed the way to go after Ford. To go back to your earlier thing, you actually had it, and then you walked away from it because he wasn't very well known then, and it was to keep pressing on that he's like Donald Trump, and if he kept running those ads, he probably would have done a lot better.
Yeah, the problem with those ads is they were working like a dam and driving voters directly to fucking Horvath. So.
You had to leave them for that reason.
We had to stop doing that before we drowned completely.
We couldn't afford to succeed.
Scott, what do you think?
Love to see that negative advertising in this dynamic, friends.
What do you think, Scott? Carbon tax Carney or canapé Carney?
So I think it's interesting. I think we're watching the Conservative campaign probably in close to its last stages of clinging to the construct that it wanted and that it hoped. So I think just like Justin is probably a time-dated approach, just because I think that people with Trump and with the changing context are going to evaluate folks a little bit differently. And I would go after them on climate. I mean, to me, the obvious answer always is how do you attack your opponent? You attack them on the basis that A, is alienated to voters, and B, is most difficult for them to deny. And, this is a guy who's committed himself to climate issues and managing climate issues for a long time. And I think
Kory just had to drop off to fire a candidate, I think.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting
no, it's every time Scott talks about climate, Kory just goes and cranks like 10 tons of emissions out the window,
We got to come up with a better system. For all those who are watching on YouTube, every time I get a call and I have to go and ignore it, I go off screen. I'm getting a lot more calls this week for some reason during the recording time than normal, but my apologies.
So if I were them, I would hit them on, I would hit Carney on climate, and then and leave people with the conclusion that he's not fundamentally changed, that it will still be an economic approach that's informed largely by carbon and all the carbon tax stuff that gets in there. I think calling it a carbon tax election starts to feel stale. But I would hit them with climate. But I think what we're also seeing, we're seeing them do two things. They're kind of feeding the hunting dogs, by sending out Melissa and the letter and all that stuff. Some of those things I think are better than worse. Some think are silly and don't track or whatever. But that's what you do when you're just kind of doing, you're throwing up a bunch of shit. But you're also seeing him gradually have to shift into how am I going to deal with this mess? And And so he moved from not talking about it to talking about it in the way that you would expect him to talk about it this week, right? So he moved into a way where you get to play sort of opposition bullshit bingo, where his tariff plan is my tariffs will be targeted. They will have the benefit of causing Americans pain, but they won't cause Canadians pain. They'll take away the things that Americans care about, but they won't affect our delicate balance with Danielle Smith in the energy sector, right? So kind of you're going to get your cake and eat it too kind of construction, which is where you would naturally go if you're him. That's the classic play for an opposition leader, and try to promise all things to all people. I just don't know, how long that's going to stand up. It may well stand up all the way to election day. And so we'll see. But I know that he's moving toward that. And I think one of the jobs for the Liberals and for Carney specifically is to try to steal the march on him on some of that stuff and make some of those positions not tenable. Start to talk about, how you would be positioned differently and make it harder. Just don't sound, seem, or be like Trudeau and make it sound like you're this year's model. You're a different beast. And that's the place you got to fight it on and force him to fight you on it so that, you jam him up the ass with, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you talk about oil. Like, where are you at on fucking oil? Because we're not going to arm wrestle Donald Trump at all if we're not going to talk about energy and oil. And you may want to pretend that's not true, but you fucking know it's true. And if I was Carney, I'd be a lot more Captain Canada. I'd be a lot more go fly kite Donald Trump. Yeah,
there's still a big wedge to be had within the Conservative coalition on this. So I think that's the place to mine.
All right. With that, Gordon Pinsent, please assemble everybody if you would.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Right. Who wants to go first with their Hey You?
I will. I'm going to do a Hey You. Jordan. Grab yourself here. You're going to be surprised. I'm going to do a hey you to Charlie Angus. I really liked what he did this week. I like his challenge about Elon Musk and asking Elections Canada to investigate. I don't know if they will, but I like it because I think it's a legitimate thing to pose. I think it's a legitimate question to ask and a legitimate piece of policy to explore. I don't know that it's going to have any effect on the likes of Pierre Poilievre in the next election. But when we see this fucking rich boy clown busting his way through American politics in a way that's truly terrifying, perching his way into the German election and European politics. I think it's legitimate to say, hold on a second. This guy owns X. And if he is going to be programming an algorithm to take away voices that he doesn't like and to promote voices that he does like, does that not actually raise fundamental questions about freedom of speech? And all the detractors to this stuff will say, oh my God, you're trying to curtail freedom of speech. No, we're not. We're saying that some of these platforms are so robust, so large, so powerful that we actually need to ask these questions about their influence and their effect, particularly when this guy telegraphs to us that he is maliciously motivated. And so I think it's legitimate to ask Elections Canada, how do we struggle with this question? Maybe there are no good answers, but it's definitely a legitimate question. It's like somebody bought the phone company. It will only put through calls that come from people he likes who say things he approves. That's a fucking problem.
Except there's a lot of different phone companies in this case, Scott. Like there are more.
And I don't know if you noticed,
that you can
but they all were at Trump's
my
inauguration.
position on the guy is not rational anymore. Jordan, you're our German expert, but what he said in Germany is just so fucking
beyond. It's
beyond anything
beyond
you could have imagined.
Yeah. So he made comments that verge on Holocaust denial, basically.
Christ almighty.
And look, and I think, and my hey you actually picks up on Scott.
Right,
so maybe I'll, because I watching the same things unfold. I mean, look, Elon Musk is not, it's not even cosplay anymore. The guy is a wannabe oligarch authoritarian who has taken a role in the government of a madman, right? Who is absolutely giving him access. And what we're seeing lining up in the United States with the tech giants or the tech bros is incredibly troubling. And so I do think that when we look tomorrow, the Hogue Commission report is going to come out. And boy, oh boy, the problems of foreign interference that commission is looking at look pretty fucking quaint right now. when we add up what's now happening with Musk, with the tech giants in the US, in Germany, what we're seeing unfold. And so my hey you is actually really to all of the federal political parties to really take that report, take the threat of what's happening on these platforms incredibly fucking seriously. There is going to be a desire or a temptation, perhaps, for some parties to see some advantage in some of this stuff, but there is not. There is no advantage. This stuff is corrosive and toxic to our democracy, and these people have no good intent for anyone. And so my hope is that people can see what's unfolding in Europe. They can see what is coming out of the Hague Commission report, and that parties, because we're not going to get nothing will change before the next federal election. It's not logistically possible to get any legislation changes through. And so God love us, that leaves us with the goodwill of political parties.
Well, actually, the NDP could support the government in the House through the spring and summer.
There we go.
Oh, I love your tenacity on that argument. It is not happening, my friend. But I like that you're trying.
We
to
have a hankering for death, and we will not be denied it.
That's right. We have strapped on our kamikaze helmets, and we are flying, friends. So look, but. There is an opportunity, I think, for the better angels of our democratic natures, such as they exist within the parties, and I truly believe that they do exist within all parties, to take a look at what comes out of that report, to take a look at what is happening in Europe, and to fucking make the right decisions. So that is my hey you. Please do that for everybody's sake.
And how about also barring Nazi white supremacists from our fucking public discourse?
Yeah,
anyway.
I mean, I really do think that when it's come to the point where it's debatable whether we can just agree that fucking Nazis are bad. This is not good. They're, the AfD, Nazi apologists, all of this. These are bad fucking people who should not be anywhere close to our politics, and they should be condemned. Period.
Yeah, except they're like a fifth of the people in a democracy. Like what is the latest numbers? Like, is it 20%? Is it 25%? Like, it's a major political party. And you could have said the same thing about parties that are seditious in nature, like the BQ or the PQ. They want to blow up the country, right? It's pretty tough.
But I think there's a difference with like platforming, encouraging, and working with is the line. It's pretty, right?
If you start banning parties that have a fifth to a quarter of the vote, that's called like a revolutionary act. Like that's called a different kind of totalitarianism. So I think you got to be careful about that. I have some advice for people who don't like
need to normalize and legitimize them.
I have some advice for people who don't like what they see on X, because I've had this from way back when it was Twitter. Just stay off the fucking platform. It is an insane asylum crossed with an open sewer. You are not going to get smarter hanging out on Twitter, now X. You're going to get dumber. It'll make you dumber and angrier and all kinds of things that are probably not good for your mental health. Stay fucking off it. Like, that's the easiest solution.
But Jordan, if X is picking my leaders, then it still affects me.
It's not. It's not picking your leaders. It's not.
Jordan,
it is the smallest of the social media platforms with the smallest audience and the most bots and all the other shit. He's going to buy
TikTok.
Yeah, and is being listened to by the man with the nuclear codes. Sorry.
Okay, Jordan, as our German person, I just want to tell you that I am reminded of the great Dennis Miller's line when East and West Germany were reuniting. And he said, I feel about German reunification the way I feel about a reunion between Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. I have not enjoyed any of your previous work together, and I'm not looking forward to what you have cooked up now.
Well, yeah, you want to talk about national and regional challenges? Stay for a beer after, friends. We'll deep dive.
All right, Kory, hey you.
All right, I'm going to talk about polling, and in particular, Main Street. Your friend Keto, well, it's not really your friend, I don't think, but liberal pollster Keto Maggie.
If I judge by what he says about me, he's not my friend. I don't have any other barometer. So,
well, we've had a whole bunch of provincial polls come out in the last week. So, from what I would call legitimate polling companies. So we had Leger, 46% for the PCs. Greg Lyle at Innovative, 52%. Campaign Research, Nick Cavalis, 47%. Abacus out today, 47%. So, the average in that is 48% for the PCs. Main Street comes out yesterday, 36 for the PCs.
Well, that's better.
He's got a 7-point gap.
Well, I do like this guy. I'm second guessing everything.
So, you've got, Nick has a 24-point gap. Leger has a 24-point gap. Greg Lyle has a 29-point gap. Abacus has a 23-point gap. And he has a 7-point gap. Jeez. Is he a pollster? Is Keto and Main Street, are they pollsters or are they partisan bullshit artists? I'm going to say Main Street is a partisan bullshit artist fake polling company, in my opinion. There you go. We'll see how they do. Hopefully better than the last elections that they've reported on, because they've missed almost every one of them. Really not good. Anyway, I have a burr in my saddle about that this morning.
All right. Jill Engelman, our producer, would you please check on our liability and defamation insurance, please?
Please bring it on. I'm happy. I'm happy to go through
I don't know that I paid the
Corey's
premium.
sending you a case of wine right now for your future pains.
Last I checked, you can make comment on public figures and give your opinion.
You can do a
And that's
Nazi
what I'm
salute at the
giving.
inauguration. I think you can shag a pollster, can't you?
Yeah, we're in a different world now, friends.
Exactly.
Buckle up.
My hey you goes out to Chrystia Freeland. I think that last week when we were talking on this show, we thought
David,
that
are you going to tell her to get out of the race? Is that where this is headed? Okay.
No.
So we're getting some mansplaining blowback. I don't know if you've noticed.
Yeah. My hey you is going to be that first week you kind of fought Carney to a draw, I would say. But this last week was a beating. And he's really grabbed this race by the throat. And you can't talk to a liberal who doesn't think he has all the momentum in this race. It's a short race. You need a big week. I've seen clips of Carney out touring around the country, doing events with people. They look like reasonably large, lively events. I'm not seeing that from you. I'm not seeing life or energy from your campaign. And you need this week to take that back, this campaign, if you're going to get in it, or it's going to run away from you really fast. So that is my hey you, and that is our show. So I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsors, CN and TikTok. I want to thank all of you accursed who watched or listened. And starting Monday, you can do it every day if that is really what you want. In the meantime, Kory, best of luck to you, brother. My greatest hope would be that you run the best campaign in Canadian history, and yet a meteor hits the earth and you lose, and nobody can blame you for it.
Thanks, brother. Yes. That is a very genuine and very unlikely series of events.
I'll be talking.
Yeah.
But I am talking to
Kory, you don't need it.
fine folks at Gucci are receiving a special order for a blameless lost jacket that we want to weave just for you.
All right. See you in a month, Kory. The rest of you, I'll see you on Monday.
Thanks, you guys.
Take care of yourselves. Thanks.
See you.